Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome to another How We Felt About, or I should say How I Felt About. I am going solo this evening as I am the only person on the channel that I know that has read Batman Resurrection, the new sequel to Batman 89, written by John Jackson Miller. I say new, this came out I think back in October of last year, and I got it right away, and I started reading it right away, but time got away from me, and I've got 6 kids, I've got lots of distractions. It's hard to find time to sit down and read, especially for review, knowing you gotta talk about it, keep everything straight. So I kind of took my time with this. I was hoping to have this review done at least a month or two ago, but I'm here now and I'm talking about it. So apologies for the long delay. There have been some folks that have been asking me about this when I'm finally going to do this, especially since I have started my Batman 89 times watch series, and I started that before I even reviewed this, although I talked about this quite a bit in the first of those. And quick plug for that series, 89 for 89. I am watching 89, that's right, 89 times with different fun gimmicks. I tried to do the second one last week, and I had weird technical problems because of some issue YouTube was having that night, I think. So I have only done one so far, but I'm broadcasting those live to the whole channel, and then if you want to watch them after the fact, you can become a Patreon at patreon.com, I said that weird, /Geekvolution, and I'm doing those ostensibly every week, or most weeks, anyway, until I finish. It'll take a couple of years, but I did talk a little bit about this and some of the interpretations that Miller has, John Jackson Miller, not to be confused with Frank Miller, a lot of Millers that have worked on Batman, but a lot of interpretations that he has about questionable things in 89 that are somewhat confusing or surreal or difficult to understand from the material, from just the material that we're given, particularly the third act. Of course, detractors from 89, people that don't like that movie, very often like to speak to, it's not enough about Batman and his psychology. We're too walled off from our protagonist. Tim Burton has a whole take with that, whether you like it or not. And the second thing is, some of it just doesn't make any friggin' sense. What is the story about? What is really happening? What is that third act? It's messy, it's all over the place, and I've always talked about how that's frustrating for me, especially after reading and reviewing Sam Hamm's first draft script, where that material starts from a much more straightforward place, much clearer character arc and themes and such, and a third act that is not a big, gigantic mess. And also some fun elements that it's too bad did not make the movie, like Batman on a horse and Batman calling a bunch of bats to come help, which is kind of in this book. Batman on a horse is not in this book. I thought that might happen. But anyway, so I've always, especially since I read that, been both frustrated with how much better the story could have been, but also still enjoying it for the weird idiosyncrasies and just the strangeness of it all. It's such a bizarre piece, and this really appreciates that while simultaneously, retroactively, trying to make a lot of those things make sense. And so one of the things Miller does in this book, one of the big mission statements, it feels like, and by the way, welcome, thanks for watching live if you're doing that, thanks for watching after the fact. I'll get to some comments after I do a little bit of a preamble here, and I will do a standard sign flip, best thing, worst thing. I'll do this like a new movie review, and then I'll get into some spoilers. And so once I get to the spoiler section, if you've read this book and you have, or even if you haven't, you just don't care about spoilers, and you have particular specific questions about any aspect of this, let me know then. I want to kind of break this down in a more general sense, like I do with new movie reviews and with co-hosts when I have panelists, in helping people decide whether or not they should take a look at this book, because I've been getting a lot of questions about just where in the sequence does this take place, and what characters are featured, and is it in continuity with the 89 comics, is it in continuity with the Schumacher stuff, lots of questions, so many questions, like Jim Carrey says in Batman Forever, and I will answer all of those things when we get a little bit further in. But one of the big mission statements for this, it seems like, because John Jackson Miller is clearly a gargantuan Batman 89 fan, he knows this material better than I do. And he says in his afterword, by the way, that when the movie came out, he saw it 12 times and was one of the potential detractors, was not sure that he bought that it was really going to be serious Batman and that it wasn't going to take its cues too much from the 60s show, and he fell into the Batmania, the Bat Fever, just like so many other people did when that came out. And John Jackson Miller comes from a journalist background. He's a comic journalist as well as a prose writer. I talked about him last week on the Captain Logan show because he did a really good breakdown on his Facebook page. The guy just writes all the time, and you can tell reading this, by the way, really smooth prose, but he had a really nice breakdown and discussion about the fall of Diamond Distributors and they're filing Chapter 11, and I didn't realize that he knew comics as well as he does and that he was such a big comics guy until I read about that. I didn't realize he was a journalist and that he actually went to journalist school. That's how he starts with writing, and then he's been writing commercial prose novels forever. He's known really well. He's known more for Star Wars, I think, than anything. He's gotten into Star Trek real hard in recent years. He's done some New Trek stuff, but he started with, and of course I haven't read that stuff because I don't like New Trek. I'm sure his novels are really good because all of his writing seems to be of a very high quality for commercial stuff based on licensed properties. But anyway, he wrote a TNG novel. This was his first foray into Star Trek, called Takedown, and I read that, and it's wonderful. That was my introduction to him. I have met him, by the way, a really nice guy. Thought about reaching out to see if he wanted to interview with this book. Maybe I'll contact him with the second one, because he is putting out a sequel to this next year, which is exciting. And I went and looked, and I haven't listened to them yet, but there are 2 or 3 or 4 pretty lengthy interviews that other folks have done with him about this book, and I figured the material was probably pretty well covered, so maybe I'll grab him next time. I didn't finish this early enough. I got this so late. I didn't even think to try to get a review copy of this, but maybe it's for the best because it took me too long to ultimately get through it. Anyway, I'm going to finally make the point I've been trying to make for 5 minutes, which is, it seems like one of Miller's big mission statements with this is give a critique and his own interpretation, his own kind of fun headcanon, which ends up becoming kind of canon if you look at the kind of extra media. I say extra media, movies already are, but if you look at the kind of contemporary material that's being put out right now in kind of creating a new Batman 89 canon, but he wants to, through a sequel, go back and try to explain all the little the confusing things that don't add up in 89, and I could see some readers looking at this as a little bit self-indulgent, but I do think, and I'll talk about references and things because I'm of two minds about some of it, but on the whole, I think it's really clever, and he has given this a lot of thought, and he has thought of explanations for things that I never have. He gives you an explanation, and I can talk about some of this in spoilers later if you want me to, but he has an explanation for how the Joker manages to down the Batwing with a single shot from his big long gun. He has an explanation for why there are Joker thugs up in the cathedral at the end of the movie, which is never made any sense to me, and one of the big classic things people like to laugh at and complain about. Some of the fun with 89 is again just complaining about and making fun of the stuff that is just completely random and seems totally arbitrary and counterintuitive. And so the Batwing gets downed right in front of church, and the Joker did not expect to be there, and then he calls his helicopter, and he says, be here in 15 minutes, better make it 10, and then we go up to the top of the cathedral, and Batman fights Joker thugs that are up there. He didn't know he was going to crash there. Why are they there? Miller has the same question, and he has a pretty decent explanation for it. And what's kind of fun is the main thrust of Batman's motivation through this book is his being tortured by one of the things that doesn't seem to add up in 89, which is, so he's tortured by some of the same things that us fans have been for 35 years, and it's like pivotal plot point stuff. So he's having, and I'll just use this to kind of break into Synopsis a little bit. Batman is on a nightly basis having nightmares where he is reliving in different surreal ways the death of the Joker, the big fight in the cathedral, over and over and over again. And he is terrified. It turns out to be a really traumatic experience for him, which I think I buy, where the end of 89 is, of course, he gives his letter to the city, and he says, if the forces of darkness ever strike again, I'll be there, but right now, I kind of stopped major crime, and I expect to be kind of peaceful now. And that is, in fact, not what ends up happening. And so he's a little bit naive about that. And he's having these nightmares because he's not sure that he buys the Joker is really dead. Even though there's a body, even though no one could have survived that fall, there are kind of tongue-in-cheek references to Selina Kyle's fall in Batman Returns, with questions of whether people can fall from a high place and make it. And of course that hasn't happened yet, but there's kind of pre-event discussion about that idea, and anyway. Because the Joker says, I was a kid when I killed your parents, Batman is really freaked out by that, and he's trying to figure out how the Joker might have known that he's actually Bruce Wayne, and it haunts him. And it doesn't just haunt him because he's worried that maybe somehow the Joker survived. And I think it's because of this kind of unfinished business thing where everything about his death is just odd and awkward, and he's still like a looming presence in Gotham and in Batman's life after his death. So even though it doesn't make any sense that he could survive, Batman is still kind of secretly worried about that because he's like haunted by his ghost, and because he's haunted by the fact that he lives in a world where a bunch of stuff doesn't add up, and so maybe the Joker could really be alive, which is a lot of fun to me. And he's he's dreaming about this constantly, and the other reason that he's haunted by it is because he's worried that he's basically just, and this is a huge theme in the novel, an actor in somebody else's story. That the Joker basically, through murdering his parents, cast him as his antagonist in his own story, and that Batman doesn't really have any agency in his own life, and that his whole life is kind of a lie because of that. And then you get that contrasted, and I really like the way this pays off at the end. I wasn't sure about it through some of the book, and I think the last 30 pages are just really crucial with this one. where I will admit that there were some places where I fell off a little bit and I wasn't sure that I was with it, and I wasn't sure where Miller was going with it, or if it was going to be satisfying, and if I was very excited about the direction. And if you have that experience while you're reading it, press on, because... And I've not heard a lot of people complain about that. The few reviews that I've looked at have been glowingly positive, and I've heard very little criticism about this book. I will lob some criticisms about it. I'm just that kind of guy. No, I do have a couple of issues, but it does, and this was the exact same experience I had with the other book I read from him, that Star Trek novel, Takedown, where I wasn't sure I was with it, I wasn't sure what the stakes were, and then when that becomes clear, it's kind of an exciting revelation, and then you get to the end, and it's immensely satisfying. That's exactly the experience that I had reading this, and I will talk more about what I mean later when I get into spoilers. For Takedown, I would also have to spoil the really big revelation to explain why I had that with that book also. But I will give you a couple of the major characters that we get from the beginning. So, and a lot of you guys are probably already aware of this by now, but from the second or third chapter, it becomes clear that one at least of our major new villains is going to be Clayface. And Clayface and Batman are paralleled throughout the novel as people who are having to kind of lead double lives and are having to act like they're on a theater stage, and are concerned that, again, someone else is kind of controlling their lives, kind of pulling their strings, and it's a really cool, like, fresh, sophisticated character parallel that I wouldn't have thought of. And I also really like thematically the way it builds from 89, because 89, thematically, such as it is all about art and perception. And with that, it's, painting and visual art. And with this, it's about acting, it's about performance. And the Joker himself is wrapped into all of that as well, because the big mystery throughout this is whether or not the Joker is still alive. And that continues to be a mystery even as we see Clayface pretending to be the Joker. And so I will give you, again, just in setting up the premise of this, that one of the big elements of this is, and I won't explain why right now, Clayface ends up being manipulated into pretending to be the Joker, and the whole city, for the most part, buys into it, but Batman is investigating the presumed identity of this Joker, while simultaneously also finding out that the corpse that it seems, presumably, that is found at the end of 89 is not actually the Jack Napier's body, is not actually the Joker's body. Or perhaps there was a switch at some point. And so there are a lot of theories, a lot of ideas thrown out as to how the Joker may have survived, or if what we're looking at is really the Joker. And of course, the reader, because we're looking both at Basil Karlo and at Batman, we know that the Joker that we keep seeing is not the real Joker, but we don't know for sure if the Joker is actually alive. And the tagline for the book is, the funny thing about Jokers is there's two in every deck. And as I was reading this, I kept wondering if that is referring to two different Jokers in the book, or if that's referring to some mystery character who is not actually the Joker that 89 kind of produces into this. And again, I won't reveal right now which of those it is, but it is one of those. So right at the start, This is very, very aftermathy, and it is an in-betweequel. It takes place, I should have said this earlier, immediately after 89, like weeks after. And Basil Karlo is transformed into Clayface during the events of the first movie. So we jump back for a second and we see that he is involved in, he's like a stagehand who wants to be an actor and is constantly learning lines like an understudy, but is never allowed to really be an actor. So that's something of a change from what we usually do with that character, something of a departure. And he's an outcast. He's a very Tim Burton type character. He really fits in this world and really fits as a parallel for Bruce Wayne, where he is really never allowed to do anything. And when he finally gets a chance, he puts on makeup, which is really dangerous, really risky right then, because it's in the middle of the Smilex scare. It's when everybody is afraid to put on any makeup. That's why that's why the news anchors in that scene in '89, when they're telling you what beauty products to be careful about, look terrible because they're not wearing any beauty products. One thing Miller brings up that's hilarious in this is he even tries to come up with an explanation for why all the patrons, the Flugelheim, are gussied up in makeup when everybody's terrified of wearing makeup. They apparently are rich enough to have it imported in, and it's really funny that he's even thinking like to that microscopic level about some of the little inconsistencies and weird mistakes in '89, potential mistakes. But anyway, so Basil Karlo ends up becoming Clayface because of a variation on Smilex that works differently than what we see in the movie, where it just puts a traditional Joker toxin, puts a big smile on your face, and it makes you laugh for a while, and then kills you right then. This gives him the ability to change his face, but not the rest of his body. So this is not the Matt Hagen Clayface from animated series. This is something a lot closer to the earliest version of Clayface, and like a false face or something, where he can change his face but nothing else. So he's got to put on wigs and beards and things and costumes to try to pass himself off as other people, but he's a really good mimic, so he can kind of change his voice just naturally. He's just good at that. And he also has some degree of super strength, and he is very durable. And so there's this whole kind of through with this where Smilex, and this has to do with the real bad guy plot, where this variation on Smilex might be a way to genetically engineer kind of superhumans. It's a really cool, neat thing to do with '89, with an aftermath story with that. We never get too far away from the original plot and ideas with '89. Everything in this is building on that, and again, partly because it reads as a critique and a new explanation for things in that movie. You also have a group of kind of a new gang called the Last Laughs, which are sort of like the Jokers in Batman Beyond, where they are, some of them, remnants of the Joker's gang, and then a bunch of people that were inspired by the Joker. And we have a world here that's kind of the opposite from something like the Nolan movies or the Batman, where the big villain has inspired more people than the hero has. He's just getting started, and nobody's sure what to make of him yet. And so you have some kind of, again, outcasts and just awful criminals that have decided that the Joker had the right idea, and they romanticize him. And you don't really have that happening with copycats for Batman yet, which is interesting. And so you have Lawrence as not a full-on gang leader because he is too much of a brute for that, but he's one of the big enforcers with the last laughs. So that's in the first movie, the guy with the boombox, because you don't have Bob the Goon anymore. And he is, he ends up, I'm trying to decide what to give away right now, but he ends up working eventually with Basil Karlo and a mysterious doctor who turns out to be the guy who created the Smilex drug, who is promising Karlo a cure and is not to be trusted. He is also, and it's pretty clear from the beginning that we can't trust this guy, and that is a guy who is calling himself Auslander, who is working with Bruce Wayne in order to help everybody in the Smilex ward of the hospital. So there's all these people that have been affected by Smilex. So like smaller degrees of it put you in like a coma, but don't full on kill you. And so there are all these people that are recovering from that. I also wonder if moving forward, because he's writing at least one more novel, I had heard maybe a trilogy, but I guess it's only 2 that are confirmed so far. And there's an ad for the new one at the end of this, just with a title, with a logo, and saying it's coming out next year. And that's going to be called Batman Revolution, which I assume takes place shortly after this, instead of moving beyond Batman Returns, because I will just give away, this is in fact in continuity with the 89 comics, and there are characters from those that we kind of put a pin in. So nobody is hugely prominently featured, but we do more than name drop some characters. So there's this section where the Joker, if he is the Joker, seems to be wreaking havoc on the city again with a similar plot to the float parade at the end of the first movie, and now he's trying to get everybody to pull their accounts out of banks. And I don't know what thematically that's doing with the rest of the story, but it's amusing. And that ends up being, I guess I'm giving some stuff away, that ends up being just a big distraction for another plot. But anyway, he's trying to get everybody to pull their bank accounts out, and we get this section where curiously we check in with several kind of random characters to see how they're all reacting to that, and that's establishing a lot of them for this continuity, and or for this novel, I guess. And I don't know how much we'll touch back with them later, because a lot of these are characters, I say a lot, there's just a few, but these are mostly characters that Batman doesn't know yet, so we can't do too much with them. But I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. I guess I should do my sign flip. I am feeling it. I enjoyed this a lot. And I will say, initially, I wasn't enjoying it as much as I expected to. Like, I can't even say initially. I couldn't put it down for the first 100 pages, and then I started to kind of lose interest after that. My worst thing is we spend too much time with Basil Karlo, and I don't know that I would have that on a second read now that I know where all of it's going, but I just didn't find him interesting and charismatic enough, and he's not supposed to be a charismatic character, but for the bombastic world that we're in here, I was getting a little bit bored having to follow him. I kept wanting to jump back to Batman, or jump back to Knox, or back to Alfred, or any of these number of characters that we live in the heads of for a while. Miller does do that kind of typical, and I don't have a problem with it, commercial writing where in a given chapter you might be from the perspectives of 4 or 5 or 6 different characters, and he gives everyone a unique voice and a very clear viewpoint, and they're not all protagonists, certainly, but you're never confused as to whose head you're in, you're never confused about what the worldview is, the lens that you're seeing things through, but it is sort of movie-like in that you are jumping around from character to character in any given scene. But anyway, I just could not get excited about about following the escapades of Basil Karlo, and he is a real, sympathetic, tragic character. And by the end, when I realized what we're doing and paralleling him with Batman, I'm much more interested. But I guess because of some of the assumptions that I made about where that would go, it was hard to get into it. I think the first half is a little slow and is a little overly aftermathy. It really picks up by the second half when we get into the mystery about whether the Joker has come back. That's when I really get with it. And there's a lot of fun to be had before that, don't get me wrong. Miller has a lot of fun with gadgets, both establishing stuff that'll be in Batman Returns, like the remote control Batarang, and also brand new stuff that he comes up with, like a quasi invisible Batman suit that he's able to wear during the day without being photographed. He's got some really cool inventive ideas with the Batman tech. But yeah, worst thing is, at least just on a first read, I thought we spent way too much time with Basil Karlo, and I thought that maybe a whole 50 pages or so could have been cut. I felt like it was too long, that first half. I don't know that I'll have that on a second read. And if you've read this and you loved it, you might find that harsh. That was just the initial experience I had with it. My best thing is the overall tone and mood of this. From page 1, somehow he in prose is able to perfectly capture the mood and the atmosphere and the look and the feel of the extremely original and unique Gotham City that we have in Batman 89. I don't know how he accomplishes that. Particularly, I think some of it is just voices of characters. He, both old and new, he does a ridiculously good job of making me believe that these people are in this city, and he gives me that very same kind of timeless feeling that 89 did. But curiously, his prose is kind of minimalistic in its descriptions, and that's usually not at all a problem. I will say that there are a few places where I struggled to fully picture new Batman tech and stuff, and some of that is just a limitation of the medium. We're dealing with very visual ideas, and he's adapting from a very visual thing in the first place. Like, you try writing a sequel to a Tim Burton movie in novelized prose form. Like, at least the comic sequels are comics that have a visual component. But hilariously, this felt a great deal more like I was in the same world than those comics do. That was one of the big complaints, and I haven't read the sequel yet, Echoes, but one of the big complaints I had about the Batman 89 comics, the first miniseries, is that art is good. Like, it's fine. I don't really feel like I'm full on in that world. and I do here all the way through. It's really consistent. It never gets away from that. And it was really cool having that wash over me and how easy it was to imagine that I was back in that world. And it's also really impressive, like I said, because he's not overly describing locales or even characters and things. Like, it's very dialogue driven, and yet I didn't, for the most part, have any trouble getting it in my mind's eye, and that's a feat. I don't know how he accomplishes that. So there is, I'll get into spoilers here in a minute. There is a part of me, and I'll probably read some comments. I keep hitting my mic. I'll probably read some comments and then I'll get into spoilers. So once again, definitely feeling it. And actually, before I make the point I was about to, I had somebody, I forget who it was, ask me before we started in the community tab if I thought this novel was very readable or worth looking at if you're not already a big 89 fan. And he said, like, he's a casual 89 guy, he's seen the movie, he doesn't love it, should he read this book? And I would say, it's hard for me to say because I'm so into that material. It's such a part of me. But my best guess is, if you're a big Batman person, but 89 is not like your favorite Batman, you probably would still get quite a bit out of this, particularly if you like Silver and Bronze Age stuff, and if you like some of the characters that are being adapted for this. Like, if you like Basil Karlo, if you like early Clayface, you'll probably find this interesting, and it's worth looking at because if you're a Batman comics person, because Miller really knows his comics, and there are a lot of really cool deep pull kinds of references, not just to 89, of which there's a million things. There's probably hardly anything that happens in that movie that is not discussed in this book in some way, shape, or form. That might turn some people off, honestly, but, and I want to get into that in a bit. But he also has lots of references to just traditional Batman stuff. It's hilarious to me, some of the material he goes to in this, because it's more fuel on the fire of Steve Englehart's obsessive idea that everything extra media Batman comes from him. And I think Miller knows about that, and I think he's playing into it, and that really cracks me up. But we get into Batman's psychology just enough in this. Like, it's character-driven. It's not like a super deep character study or anything, and I think you'd be breaking Burton's kind of perspective on it, on this character. You'd be breaking his interpretation if you got too full-on in a Batman's head. But, like, he's allowed to be a little bit vulnerable here. He has an honest-to-God character arc, and it's a take that fits that material, and would maybe also appeal more to, like, a Batman animated series fan than either 89 or Returns. I think he walks that line super well. One question that I always like to raise with an adaptation like this is this the right medium for it? It is really curious to do a novel based on something that is so visually stylized, right? And in some ways, I'm of two minds about this too. I'm just two-faced with this book. I kind of wish to one side that this was what the comics did first instead of going past Batman Returns. Because there are some really visually stunning sounding things that would be really cool to realize in comics. This is a detective story and a noir story before it's a big action superhero piece, but there are some big set pieces, and like, it's a little bit more dialogue driven than those movies, but they also kind of have this where they stop and talk quite a bit. and yet there are, like I said, some really cool big action things. You do get a big Batmobile chase, maybe a couple, and there are some cool fisticuff things. Batman's having to deal with a bunch of arsons all throughout the book. That's the big thing the last laughs are doing, and then toward the end, the stakes get much larger than I thought they were, and the way Batman solves everything is not with a gigantic, huge action piece, at least at the end, but there is a pretty big, expensive seeming, if you were to film it, a fight sequence before that's pretty thrilling. So, like, there is quite a bit of action here, but this just feels so much more like that world to me. I kind of wish that something like this was more what we were doing in comics. At the same time, we wouldn't be getting as introspective with Batman if it was in comics, I would imagine. I don't think the more kind of thoughtful, heartfelt stuff would be allowed to be there as much. So in that sense, I am really glad this is a novel. There's a lot of really great interactions with Alfred. I think some of the best stuff in the book is the friction that Batman has both with Alfred and later on with Vicky Vale, who I was surprised makes it into the novel. I will go into full-on spoiler territory at this point. I'll make this point, and then I'll run down some of the live comments here. So if you have questions about anything in the book, now is the time, and I'll start spoiling stuff here in a minute. But anyway, there's some really great fun banter with Batman and Alfred, certainly, but the thing I most appreciate is their conflict, their friction. Batman has this clear obsession, or at least this difficult time parsing out how much of it is obsession and how much of it is a real feeling of responsibility to Gotham now that he's set himself up as kind of their savior, or at least somebody to help out the cops occasionally. This, as a bridging point between 89 and Returns, does a really good job in getting us to the status quo we have more at the beginning of Returns, although there's still some space in between. There's plenty that Miller can do before we get to Returns, and it looks like that's probably what he's going to do, is continue on from this instead of going post-Returns, because he'd have to go quite a bit past Returns now, since there's 89 comics. I was a little surprised that he's counting those, but because he introduces Duke, the new Robin that's in that. He introduces Barbara Gordon, and they're very clearly the same counterparts. And his characterization of Harvey Dent, who doesn't get a lot to do in the book, is clearly trying to go in line with what the comics do, and is dealing with some of the same identity themes with the rest of this book. So he doesn't get a lot to do, but that is definitely correlated with the kind of face that Bruce is putting on for the city, and that Carlo is, etc. Anyway, I'm getting in the weeds here, but I think the book has really consistent voices and consistent with 89 for all of its returning characters, and then its new characters also just fit like a glove. They definitely feel like they should be in that world. But I will say, some character interactions feel I have the voices of the actors from those movies more in my head than others, so I think they all fit and they're pretty good, but I don't always have Keaton in my head, and I think it's partly just because, and this is just a casualty I think of it being a novel, his Bruce Wayne and his Batman talks a lot more than I'm used to, and there are places where I feel like he goes on a little long for it to still feel like the somewhat monosyllabic Michael Keaton version. But then there are certain characters that he gets with that immediately his voice comes back to me. And Alfred is one of them, for the most part anyway, and Vicky Vale is also. I don't know what it is about whenever she shows up, and she's in the latter half of the book, but every time she's got page time, I guess I'll put it that way, with Bruce, the writing feels like it's right out of that movie. It feels like exactly the way they spoke to each other. It feels like Sam Hamm wrote it like back then, and it's really impressive, just how close he gets with that. There is also a part of me that wishes that instead of kind of making this both a sequel and a treatise on 89, Miller had been allowed, and I don't know if you would have thought to do this, would have been allowed to retell 89 in novel form. So do a new novelization that included all of his kind of fan theories that he's made canon now. This is like the best kind of fan fiction, partly because it's official and it's good, so I can kind of count it. That's a thing that I've wanted to do forever, and now somebody's come in and done it. I don't know if I ever talked about this on the channel, but I had this idea a few years ago to write 89 with, like, rewrite that movie, and maybe Returns also, with the exact same, like, overview of the plot, but just a lot more character-driven, and where everything actually lines up and makes sense, and feels like a more literary kind of narrative. And, again, I keep saying retroactively, but writing this with hindsight, Miller kind of does that. It might be, like I said, a little bit frustrating for some readers because he spends so much time on it, and I think it's hit and miss. There are, like, I'm real case by case with it. There are places where it feels both clever and perfectly reasonable because, like, it is a sequel, and it is a few weeks after that, and it is, a lot about the aftermath of that movie. So obviously, every time Smilex is brought up, I'm not going to roll my eyes. But there are some places where he'll call back to a specific line of dialogue, and it makes perfect sense within the context of it that somebody would bring that line up again. And sometimes it reads a little cute. Particularly when it'll be a line that somebody says that they weren't necessarily around for. Or I'll give you an example. When Vicky Vale finally comes in, so the idea is, again, spoilers, the idea is Vicky has left because she thought, and I think this makes sense, he's got to come up with a reason to write her out because she's not there in Returns. And Bruce just says, it kind of hand waves it, didn't really work out. Well, he has more of an explanation for that, and this does line up with it. But Miller really gets into it here, and he says, sorry guys, I'll read comments in a minute. He really gets into it here, and he says that Vicky helped Bruce for a while with his life as Batman, but she never went back into the Batcave, which I thought was an interesting detail. She wanted to be completely separate from that, so she would help nurse his wounds and talk with him and have discussions about his missions and stuff, but only ever in the manor. And it's because she believed that he should have closure and not feel the need to keep being Batman after he takes out the Joker, because the Joker killed his parents, and that's his motivation for being Batman in the first place. But she doesn't understand his drive and why he's so obsessed and why he didn't get that closure. Like I discussed earlier, with his fear that the Joker just kind of made him a plaything in his own play. And I like that idea a lot. I think it's really good. And so I've lost my train of thought. I forgot why I brought that up in the first place. But that's his explanation for why she leaves. And she comes back because the Joker seems to be back. And she doesn't want Bruce to have to go through that alone. It's a shared trauma, she says. And I like that a lot also. And immediately, Bruce and Knox reach out to her when they think that the Joker is back. Because they think he might go after her. So, really good excuse to bring her back into the narrative. And, another explanation that Miller has for something that people have always complained about and made fun of in '89 is Alfred letting Vicky Vale into the Batcave. And he has the best explanation for it I've ever heard. Sometimes he'd bring up a thing and it would make me, and I would think, well, yeah, duh. Like, that makes a lot of sense. His explanation for why the thugs are up in the cathedral is that they're just lookouts. It's a really tall building, and they're looking down at the chaos above, and they've got radios, and they're letting the Joker know what is happening with, like, police and Batman and things. That's reasonable. That makes sense, I suppose. But there's a really good character-driven reason that he gives for Alfred letting Vicky Vale into the Batcave. And that is, you tried to tell her your secret anyway. Alfred's whole thing in this is Bruce went to her apartment and was going to bare his soul and wanted to let her into the fold. And keep in mind, and Miller doesn't get into this, but this tracks, like, this has got to be part of it. Alfred really likes Vicky Vale in '89 and wants it to work out between her and Bruce, and thinks and agrees that it would be a good idea for him to let her in. And so the only reason he doesn't tell her I'm Batman, he mouths it, he's about to, is because the Joker breaks in on them in the apartment, which also lends credibility to the idea that Batman has almost like PTSD about his experience with the Joker, and the idea that the Joker is always inserting himself into his life, and that he created Batman, and Batman is not actually Bruce Wayne's. But the idea that he would just let Vicky into the Batcave because that's what Bruce wanted, he just didn't get around to it. Perfect. That makes all the sense in the world. I love that. Okay, I'm going to read a few comments. I'm going to see if people have any questions about the book. And then I'll get into some more spoiler territory. I'll talk about how the book ends and why I found it satisfying finally when I was when I felt like it might be going in a little bit of a lackluster direction before. Nicholas Bodo says, hi, Cap. Hi, Nicholas. It's good to see you. Hayden, I was going to buy this, but I didn't want to spend $30 on a book. I'll probably grab it. I like Miller. Yeah, you should. I think Amazon had it even just as it came out for less than that. I don't remember what I paid for it, honestly. This is one of those shut up and take my money kinds of moments. I really don't even remember what I paid for it. Hayden says he needs to get his Old Republic comics. I forgot that he wrote some of that, but I meant to mention earlier that I did know that he's worked in comics. And as sad as I am to say this, I kind of wish now that he was the guy that we'd gone to for the Batman '89 comics in the first place, because I was very excited about Sam Hamm, but I didn't love his approach in... He just seemed to have a really difficult time reconciling what he did with what Tim Burton did, and he just didn't feel like the same guy coming back and doing it now. I found this a great deal more authentic, and I also, not just authentic to the material, but to the time. I feel like this book could have come out then. One of the things that I was really impressed with reading this is the attitude, the flavor of the prose is really early 90s. If you've ever gone back and read any commercial stuff from that period, and he is not intentionally, and I'm not saying there's not anything good written in that period when I say this, but he's not trying to make it like quaint or dumbed down on purpose. He obviously adjusts his voice for the material that he's working in, and I think he's trying to channel the 89 novelization a little bit, which he speaks to in his afterword as an influence on this. And he says, by the way, that he went to the novelizations, both 89 and Returns, which were written by the same author, I forget his name right now, for character names that never appeared in the movies, and used specifically those character names, which I thought was really cool of him to do. But he has a very liberal use of exclamation points, which sometimes might read a little bit cheesy, but it's so in line with the way this kind of stuff was written then, and it gives it kind of a lightness, and makes it feel more like a comic adaptation to me for whatever reason that I really appreciated. And don't get me wrong, like, this goes to somewhat dark places, and it doesn't feel like a young adult novel or anything, but that gave it a really period flavor that I appreciated. The prose, I'll just speak to this real quick, like I said earlier, is really smooth, and I love his rhythm. This is a guy that you read any amount of his writing and you go, oh, this is a veteran. The man is just confident, and he knows what he's doing, and he looks like he's more comfortable communicating this way than he probably is conversing with someone. It's just, it reads so second nature. He has, this might be a weird point to make, but whenever I see this, I like to call it out. He's got a really good sense of white space on the page, and variation in sentence lengths. It reads smooth and quick and punchy, and you're playing the movie in your head, which I really love. And like I said, the only thing that kind of sucks about this being in book form is I kind of want some pictures of some of the new tech. Like, he has a hovercraft that replaces the Batwing, that can only hover for like a while and doesn't actually fly all the way up into the sky. That's called the Roost. And try as I might, I could not get a good sense in my head of what that thing actually looks like. He has another vehicle toward the end that I also, that's called the Alpha Bat. Not to be confused with the Alphabet. The Alpha Bat. And sounds kind of hokey, but he's got a really good explanation for why it's called that. But anyway, that thing, just could not quite get a good sense in my head of it. So I sort of wish there were, at the very least, some illustrations maybe, that maybe he'd work with an artist, and I didn't need this to be fully illustrated, but maybe in the back of the book, like some fantasy novels will give you maps and will give you like images of weaponry and characters and things, just because it's a visual enough thing. Sometimes you need a little bit more than just your own imagination. I kind of had that with this, with at least the tech side. Miller also focuses on that stuff pretty hard, and he's not too like Moby Dick about it, he's not a Moby Dick about it, where you like have to stop for 30 pages and read all about this new piece of technology, and he just gets real, in the weeds and stops everything to do it. It's not like that, but he is very interested in making it clear how this stuff works, and it could be more self-indulgent than it is, but that is clearly a focus for him. And so it's interesting that he spends a lot more time describing that stuff and just how it works than he does describing like buildings and rooms and what people are wearing and that kind of thing. Let me see what else people are talking about. Slipmaker, your discussion with Austin about the crazy Two-Face spin-off 89 comic intrigued me so much, even while neither of you seemed fond of the thing as a whole. Austin liked it a little bit better than I did. I I just didn't love it as an '89 thing. One thing that's really interesting about this versus that too is, as I said, this is really referencey. I'll give you another example. There's when Vicky Vale. I think I started to say this earlier, and I missed it. I moved on. Vicky Vale comes in, and I can't remember what it is, but there's a reference or two to things they said in the first movie, and I was just kind of like biting my lip, going, "He's gonna have." Because Vicky's complaining about his still being Batman, and he's going to have a line where he's going to say he's got to go to work, right? Like, of course, that's going to be in there. And then it wasn't. And I'm saying that based on all these other places where, like, you know, your Uncle Bingo comes up. Like, there's all these, you know, relatively obscure line references where he just cannot, like, again, a little self-indulgent. He just cannot help himself but to call back to these lines when he thinks of them. And to be honest with you, if I was writing this book, I know I would do the exact same thing. That's why I'm of two minds about it. Because I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody that's maybe not as fond of this material as I am, or somebody that's maybe more, for lack of a better word, triggered by that, where, like, you just want to move forward. You don't want the thing to be too much of a nostalgia trip, and to just be about, remember the time where this guy said this? But at the same time, like, would I be able to resist that temptation myself? No, I couldn't. 89 is like a second language to me. It's, you know, Drinking Drano would be in here somewhere. That actually is a line that's not in here. But if I wrote this, it probably would be. So I'm more than sympathetic to John Jackson Miller with that. But when Vicky shows up, I expected Bruce to say that. And then, like, 100 pages later, she says it. There's actually a place where Vicky says, "I've got to go to work." And I was like, of course. And, like, it's a natural line to say there, I guess, but it's also a callback. What helps this to not feel... And again, I haven't heard anybody else complain about this, which I'm kind of surprised by. And I think maybe it's because the story itself does not feel like just a nostalgia trip. There are plenty of new elements, and Batman's got a unique character arc. It's not just repeating the exact formula from the first movie. Again, we're in spoiler territory. There are a lot of things that it does go back to from the first movie, and not just because it's a sequel, or just because it's, like, naturally building up on that material. We open the book with the same street thugs that were in the first movie, and I was like, wow, I don't really know how I feel about that. It's kind of fun going back to them and seeing, like, what they're doing now and how they feel about the events of the first of the movie. But I was like, I don't know, is that too much of the obvious thing to do? Like, I feel like I'm fighting with other people's voices in my head when I'm reading this. The whole thing ends in the cathedral again, but it's so much about the trauma that Batman experienced. And that's such a major set for, like, the play of Batman's life, looking at it in theatrical terms, because that's what this is all about. That's the natural place for it to end. We should go back there for this material. But the most important thing, and again, full-on spoiler territory, that makes this not feel too regurgitaty or too self-indulgent as a sequel, where it's just a nostalgia trip, is the Joker is in fact not back. It is not the real Joker, and that would have been the obvious thing to do, right? And it's called Batman Resurrection. It suggests that we full on bring the Joker back, and that is not in fact what happens. The way he's resurrected is as an idea, and the whole point of this is the Joker, to put this in Nolan terms, I guess, changed things forever. And the question is, can Batman Again, like, is it just an obsession for Batman, or does he have a responsibility, even if he gets over his obsession, to continue what he started because he promised to? And that's kind of the place we're at the end of the book. I would have liked a coda that discussed that more, but that is kind of where we're at the end. Since I'm in spoiler territory, I'll just break down a couple of other things for folks that want to hear about it and haven't read this yet. Because sometimes people just like to hear what happens in the thing, even if they're not going to read it. So, Auslander, the doctor who created Smilex, is, as I understand it, the cartoonish-looking doctor in the white coat in Axis Chemicals in '89 that you see for like 5 seconds. The Joker says, "We're taking it out a whole new door." And that line is brought up again in this book, because of course it is. And he also turns out to be Hugo Strange. And I was thinking a couple weeks ago, before I finished this, that if I was going to do a Batman sequel, one of the first things I'd go to would be Hugo Strange. And then, lo and behold, this character that I had been reading the whole time turned out to be Hugo Strange. And I think Miller does a really good job of making it clear that something is going on with that guy, and he's probably somebody you know. And the Crime Doctor is brought up as an idea in a couple places, and I thought maybe it was just that. But then I think the idea is supposed to be that the Crime Doctor is actually... It's complicated, because the actual... I went back and looked at this. The actual comic book Crime Doctor is brought up as being replaced by the guy from '89. But their Crime Doctor is the guy who... says, "Do you see what I have to work with here?" The surgeon who, the clandestine surgeon that does surgery on Jack Napier and gives him his permanent smile. And he's made into a big plot point here, because Hugo Strange uses his body as a decoy to make everybody think that the Joker... that the Joker's body was never found and that he's still alive. That's what we do with that guy. Okay. I need to read it again to get a sense of, because I don't remember like why exactly he picked him, but that's what ends up happening there. So Hugo Strange's whole plan is to get his hands on the rest of the Smilex he created, which the government has. And he does this by pretending to be an altruistic doctor that's trying to help everybody in the Smilex ward. And he ends up using Basil Carlo to help him distract the city of Gotham so that he can break into a government facility and get his hands on the rest of Smilex. And I wonder, by the way, if in the next book, Miller won't use Smilex as kind of like kryptonite in Smallville, where it's a plot device that you can use to give anybody any kind of superpower that you want to. Because regular Smilex doesn't do this to you, but he's got this other variant, and we're told that there are even other variants that he uses to make Clayface, and then that he uses to make the Monster Men. So his big plot is to take over Gotham by transforming all of the Last Laughs into an army of Monster Men, and then he'll turn all of Gotham into Monster Men. So it turns into the Lizard plot from Amazing Spider-Man, or Magneto's plot from the first X-Men movie. We're doing that old chestnut again, which works fine here, where his worldview is he doesn't believe that anybody in the world matters but him, and that he should play God because when he was younger, people were mean to him, and he wants to, and he's another outsider, he is another misfit, like he's very much a Tim Burton character, and he wants to get, and this is kind of traditional Hugo Strange. He definitely has this in comics early on, but he's less of a psychologist in this and more of a chemist. Although he does, in a lecture, get into the psychology of Batman a little bit, as being someone that nobody can relate to, which is very tongue-in-cheek, and I love that Miller wrote that, because that's the whole point of Tim Burton's Batman, is that he's a character that nobody can relate to, even though the reason that most fans of Batman say, or a lot of fans of Batman say they like Batman, is because he's a human being and you can actually relate to him. Tim Burton's Batman is arguably not that way, and it's kind of fun to find out retroactively that it was Hugo Strange that gave that speech. But anyway, so his whole idea, his whole philosophy is that there is no such thing as true individuality, and that everybody outside of yourself is like a tribal entity that needs to be controlled by someone, and that if you truly want to have control, the only way to really do it is to do other people's thinking for them and subjugate them. And so he talks about Nazis and stuff, and talks about how, like, the master race idea doesn't work, because there's not a group of people that is better than another group of people. You have to look at the world, you have to play God. You have to look at the world as, whether I'm better than anyone or not, I am going to live as if the rest of the world is just my playground. And so he has some, I forget the word, he brings it up, and it's a word that I actually wrote this down. Let me pull this up, because it's an interesting like psychiatric term. But let me find it real quick. He says, solipsism. The idea that you are the only person that exists and everybody else is basically a figment of your imagination. And he says that what he believes in is a variation on this, where other people may exist, but you have to live as if they don't. And the reason I really like this idea is because he is the furthest extreme of what Batman and Clayface come to by the end of the novel. So their realization together is, Clayface actually has a happy ending in this, which surprised me, especially because we're getting away from the Batman Returns formula. I really respect Miller for not doing that before Returns. Returns still gets to establish the formula of the villain that is established and the villain that gets their origin, and then at the end, the villain that survives and the villain that dies. Returns does that, and then a bunch of other superhero movies do that afterwards, including other Batman movies. This does not do that. This allows both villains to live at the end. Hugo Strange is, his brain is kind of a pile of mush by the end, sort of like Riddler at the end of Batman Forever, but he is alive, and Clayface is basically allowed to, he's sort of given a slap on the wrist. Like, I'm jumping all over the place, excuse me, but Clayface, basically, it's all a big misunderstanding, and, like, he does make some big mistakes, but he is made to believe by Hugo Strange, Auslander, that he killed his old director boss, who ruined his life by giving him the makeup and turning him into Clayface. And it turns out that he actually did not accidentally or otherwise commit that murder. And so he ends up not having to go to prison at the end, but he does still have some things to make up for, because he did pretend to be the Joker for a long time, and there's some fallout from that, of course. But more or less, Clayface is kind of a good guy at the end, and I wasn't really expecting that. The whole thing really read like a Amazing Spider-Man 2 Electro situation. You just kept waiting for him to lose his mind and go on a rampage. And there are places where he nearly does that. He's got a lot of those kind of opportunities for change. But the whole time that he's working for the bad guys, he's questioning it. He's complaining about it. He's pushing back against it. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. And finally, Auslander ends up locking him in the same trunk that he locked his old boss in when he thought that he killed him, because he's not cooperating anymore. And so anyway, so you've got oh, okay. So the whole thematic idea here. I'll finish this point. So Hugo Strange's way of coping with his own insecurities and with people not accepting him is to force the world to be what he wants it to be. To try to take it over. It's a pretty good explanation for a typical bad guy takeover plot. And what Batman and Clayface come to is an understanding of living life on their own terms and not trying to force the world to be what they want it to be. And both of them have a Joker of sorts, and Hugo Strange is that for Clayface. And again, this idea of a villain that forces you to just be an actor in their play. I also thought that was a really creative idea, and I don't know if Miller does this on purpose, but I like all the kind of meta commentary that's in this book about 89 and Returns. And one of those things is the Joker is always talked about, sometimes fondly, sometimes negatively, by people as getting all the screen time in 89. That it's the Joker's movie and Batman's just kind of in the background. People feel this way about it. And I like the idea that Batman himself is feeling that. That he comes into this book and he goes, God, that last movie might have just been the Joker's. And I've been his plaything. And so I think that's really creative. And like I said, the last 30 pages of this really brought it home for me. Miller is really great at sticking the landing with stuff, and you want to just kind of hang on with it, because I wasn't sure what exactly it was getting at with Clayface. I thought his whole thing was a little bit lame until I got to the end and I saw how it paralleled Batman, and then it totally won me over. I didn't see what the stakes were really until, like, it just didn't feel big enough for a proper Batman sequel. It felt way too much of just Aftermath. Until you get to the last, like, 50 pages and you find out that he's got the Monster Men. And then you get to the last 25 pages and, like, it takes to then before you realize that he wants to, I didn't even talk about this part, but hypnotize Gotham into becoming his Monster Men. And so then in kind of a cool way, and I don't know if this is intentional on Miller's part, but there's a little bit of Arkham stuff in it. It feels like kind of a mix of the first two games to some degree, with, because of course Hugo Strange and Clayface they're really involved in the second game, and Clayface pretends to be the Joker there also, and because you have a Hugo Strange that has this big secret plan to destroy a whole section of Gotham, and it's kind of like merging that with the Titan plot in a way, except he's not going to give himself the Titan. Again, this is a less, like, psychologically bent Hugo Strange, although he goes to Arkham at the end, and you get the sense that he could turn into that later, maybe. I said his brain is kind of mush, but you get the sense that he could somehow come back from that, maybe. Before I get to more comments, the other thing that got me really excited about the ending is it sets up the Riddler, and it sets him up in a really cool way, because there's a place where Batman's in the sewer and he's fighting the monster men and he almost loses and somebody rescues him. And I thought I missed something. I was like, who came in? Who rescued him? And then you find out at the end that it's either the Riddler or Riddler sent somebody. But he's given a riddle at the end, and it's a very 60s Batman-esque riddle, which I liked a lot. It was very much a really convoluted, this is the only possible answer sort of riddle. And it's obvious that that's who we're setting up. And so I'm stoked to see how he features in the second book. And I would assume it'll be like this, where there's going to be at least a couple of villains, and it might not be real clear who is going to be like the big mastermind. Because in this, Hugo Strange has this big mass manipulation plot where he is kind of forcing everything to happen behind the scenes and you don't realize it. Another big aspect of this that I forgot to talk about is Max Schreck. So I didn't really go down the list of characters that from those two movies that this brings in, but Max Schreck is actually bankrolling Auslander secretly, and he's being made to believe that he's dealing with the Joker. He's not sure he really buys it, but that's what Auslander is trying to make him think. And so there is some like, what's the word I'm looking for? There's some kind of city corruption stuff, because you've got to set him up as a mogul that is not above board at all, and there's a little bit of organized crime stuff, but not a ton, because you have this big power vacuum, and it's a lot more about the government and the big business stuff in this particular case. But he's there. You definitely get Christopher Walken's voice when he shows up. Like I said, you do... Well, I guess I didn't mention this. You do introduce Selina Kyle. She doesn't have a lot of screen time because she can't be there with Batman yet. They've not met. But there is a cool moment when she is... Well, there's a couple things. Like, she's scared to death of the Joker because she actually met the Joker in '89, apparently, which is kind of fun. And he says hello there to her, which is what her... what the neon sign in her apartment says, which she apparently also, like, already has, so that's just a coincidence, but I guess that's kind of fun. Again, it's really difficult to decide when these things get too cutesy and too indulgent, but that's in there. And like I said, Knox comes back. I wish we did a little bit more with him, but I like what's here. And I like how he's still just sticking to his story and trying to get the headlines at the same time as he's actually actively helping Batman. He gets to run around with Batman in this a little bit, which is fun. And there was another thing I was going to mention. Well, let me read some more comments and I'll see if it comes back to me. Thomas Lowe, so Clayface here is basically Neville Sinclair from Rocketeer. Not really. Because like I said, he will actually turn out to be, more of a good guy. Well, and because he's not famous, he's not popular, he's just a full-on outcast that wants to be an actor, but actually doesn't care about fame. He just wants to do the job, which is interesting. John Kelling, Lawrence does still have his boombox. In fact, I think he kind of has multiple ones throughout. Darren Dooley, Harvey Dent is in the book. Again, he doesn't get a ton to do. Toaster, it should have been a comic, not a novel. Like I said, I'm of two minds about that, but there were definitely places where I really wished I could have seen it realized visually. Nicholas Bodo, you have me at Hugo Strange. Yeah, I imagine that Austin will really appreciate this because of that. Because I told Austin that Clayface was here, but that he was kind of subjugated by another villain, and he was like, "Oh, that sucks. I think Clayface can stand on his own now. We don't have to do that with him anymore." But the person that subjugates him is another of Austin's favorite villains, so maybe he'll appreciate that. Toaster, the book sounds too long. I do think it's a little lengthier than it needs to be. For the story it's telling. It's 400 pages. I think it could be closer to 3 or 350, personally. I imagine the next one will be a lot more exciting and a big step up. And again, I ultimately, at the end of the day, like this a lot, but it does feel like the appetizer before the main course. It absolutely has that. How long have I been talking? Oh my god, have I been at this for an hour and a half? I don't know where that time went. I just wasn't even looking at the clock. Okay, well, that's me. I'm very long-winded. Anyway, I wanted to get a little bit in-depth with this. But Batman Resurrection, I don't know. If you're still listening to this, you probably have already read this. But I definitely recommend this to... Batman fans in general. Like I said, you don't have to adore 89, and I also think that some of the referencey stuff might irritate you less if you don't know the movie by the back of your hand. I'll say that too. Once again, I also really sympathize with that, and I can't decide how much of a problem it is, but I did have reservations about it in places, at least. I will say that. But I'm glad I finally finished it. I'm really stoked to read the next one, and I will try to review it faster more shortly after that one comes out. But anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I should have brought up. I don't know how I've been talking this long. Nicholas Bodo, it looks to be the most thematically rich story in Burton's version of Batman so far. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I hope that he does, I hope he gets one more. I hope we get 3 of these. But anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Join me again for 89 for 89. Hopefully we'll get to actually do one of those this week, and I'll be watching the movie again, but on VHS. So much Batman 89 talk on the channel, so join me again for more of that, and I will be back with lots more stuff here in the next few days on Geekvolution. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you, folks.